Welcome to the Hunting Beast Report, a live video podcast with Dan Infalt and host Jeremy Gillespie.
Mario, welcome to the show. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Great. Thanks for joining us. As everybody can see, Dan is not here this week. He made a trip to Iowa. Sounds like maybe he had some action, but I can't say a whole lot more than that for now. So Mario is filling in. And Mario, I've wanted to get you on my show for quite a while. I know you're busy and it just hasn't happened. So glad to speak with you in person here.
Yeah, glad I could make it on, and this worked out well. Filling in for Dan. He's the lucky one hunting in the land of the giants, if you will. So
yeah, always a coveted tag to draw. I had the Iowa tag in 2021. Amazing place to hunt. So it's exciting. It takes 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it is now to draw. But when you do, it's you always know you're in for a treat.
Sure. Someday.
So Mario, we haven't seen you as much on the Beast channel or on the forum, and I know you're always real busy. For people that don't know, you co-founded the Hunting Beast gear, so the stand, the sticks, and the other items with Dan, and I imagine that's a big part of the reason that we don't see you as often. So what have you been up to, and maybe just let us know what's going on with Hunting Beast gear.
Yeah, for sure. Hunting Beast gear, we've been around since 2017, so we're kind of into the full swing of things again for this season. Season goes in sprints and then a little bit of lulls. Right now we're in a bit of a sprint because everyone's getting ready for the rut. Usually at the beginning of October is another big key time period because some states don't open up until October. You get a big rush in August as people are starting to purchase their gear. So a lot of right now is, working with customers on order fulfillment, working with customers on getting their stuff ASAP because they realized they were having an issue with something and they needed fixed, or they realized they were missing an essential part of their gear that they need, and so they're reaching out for that. But we also get a fair amount of feedback right now. Some people are knocking down some deer, and they have some really nice stories that they often share with us personally, just on what they learned and how they're able to use the equipment. So I enjoy that aspect of it. You get, not only do you get to learn from the community that's purchasing gear from you, but you also you get to hear a lot of good hunting stories and get some good picks, and get a little jealous because there's some guys that shoot some really nice stuff.
Yeah. That time of year, everybody that I've been talking to, so it's October 24th. A lot of my friends that have cameras or the guys that run cell cameras, it seems like the last 2 or 3 days, especially with some cold fronts moving in through the Midwest. And I'm in Montana now. We're supposed to get snow tonight. My buddy was out antelope hunting a few days ago. It was 81 degrees. So things are changing, and it's the time of year that everyone looks forward to. And speaking of that, let's talk about the buck in the thumbnail. So you sent me a picture of a buck and said that was a morning hunt about this time of year. So why don't you give us the backstory on that? Maybe some of the tactics you use, lessons learned there.
Yeah, I wanted to share that one again. It's an 8-pointer, a shot that was a really nice 8-pointer. But this time of the year specifically, if I kind of take the full range of the year and what I like to do, I mean, they're a common tactic, as many of you have heard before. At the beginning of the year, I really like the first week of the season, as many of beast-style hunters do, primarily because those bucks are in those summer patterns, but specifically around remote food sources and certain food sources. This year, I believe they call it a mast year for acorns. So at least in areas of the Midwest, we had certain trees that were dropping an exorbitant amount of acorns, and they do that. So apparently, as it goes, they do that to ensure the longevity of the oak tree, so the oaks won't die out in those areas where you get oaks growing in sections. And I think that's particularly important in a lot of the areas that I end up hunting, because we do have an overabundance of buckthorn. so that those buckthorn saplings are taking over a lot of these small oak flats, especially in swamps. I don't see it as much out in western Wisconsin in the hill country and northern Wisconsin in like the kettles. It seems that that cycle of acorns dropping and maples dropping, that they actually are regenerating quite effectively, meaning the majority of the sapling trees on the forest floor are oaks and maples. But out in the swamp, you kind of get a difference in that. And I do actually, this is deviating off your question a little, but I do a little land management too on one of the areas that I hunt, and we try to focus on trimming back a lot of that buckthorn. So anyways, at the beginning of the season, like many of us, I'm hopping around in known bedding areas and try to focus in on that movement from those bedding areas specifically to those remote food sources. And acorns happen to be ones that can be really effective or hot. This time of the year, it's interesting because, and I will admit I don't fully understand the cycles on it, but I do follow like some of the literature that's posted on the Hunting Beast. I've got another friend that's cataloged a lot of data over the last 5 to 7 years around moon phase and around movement. And my anecdotal assessment of the data that I've collected is during this time of the year, I still really like to focus on bedding and where I believe there to be either by sightseeing or by scouting that there's a mature buck in that area. And what I've seen especially this last like 2 weeks, the activity of the mature bucks, they've started to move in gray light back to bedding in the morning. So now is a time when I like to start doing morning hunts. In fact, like the last 3 days, based on the moon chart that's published, were good morning days for movement of mature animals. And ironically, a couple of the cameras that I have out, they actually showed that. So a few of the hunts, I mean, now there's scrapes opening up everywhere. If you guys have been out in the woods, at least in Wisconsin, there are a lot of scrapes opening up that previously weren't there like 3 weeks ago. And I typically look for scrapes that are in areas where there's junctions between changes in topography. So sort of like a central meeting zone where the deer that are in the area have a reason to go there. And typically I find that where you see a change in topography. So it might be a hardwood that meets up with a swamp area where you have a mix of like red brush and willow. But then there's some other land feature, whether it's a thicket, like in a lot of cases where the areas I go, it'll be a thicket that's growing up of just buckthorn. So you get kind of a mixture of this topography where, and there might be a change in elevation with that too. So often I'll find a scrape there, and a lot of times it'll be a larger, what I would consider a primary scrape. So on Friday night, I sat in one of these areas, and I had 2 bucks come in early, like 3:30 in the afternoon, and they came in. The first buck that came in was actually just after a doe had actually entered the scrape. I heard a light grunt to the north of me, and the doe wrapped around the backside of the scrape. There was a scrape underneath an actual buckthorn tree, and there was a licking branch on the buckthorn tree that was snapped off. Doe wrapped around the backside of me, and then I looked ahead of me into where I had some tree cover and stuff, and a buck gave chase. He came walking right down, walked at 15 yards. He was a decent mainframe 8-pointer, but he had like a kicker on his G3. So it was cool because got to make the choice on whether or not I wanted to shoot him, and I decided to let him walk by. But though that age class of buck, like I typically see during this time of year, like they're going to be more aggressive. They're kind of out running around, asserting themselves. And he gave chase to that doe and chased her right into the thicket. And then I heard him actually transition into the swamp because he was sloshing around in the cattails. Probably 30 minutes after that, I had a larger group of doe. There ended up being 6 doe that were sort of herded up and moving along the west edge of the same island. And I thought they were just going to drop off the south end of the island and sort of, keep going further down the transition. But they actually started wrapping back around the base of the island and going towards my location. So the other thing about this location, so not only does it have these 3 different topographies that sort of meet up, but the other key factor is that about 50 yards in front of me, there is a section of white oaks, and those white oaks have pretty much dropped out. I mean, as I was sitting there, I wasn't hearing any more active fall of acorns, but in the weeks prior, those oaks were producing a lot of acorns, and there were deer in those oaks through multiple times during the day. It was like a 9 a.m., a 1 p.m., a 3 p.m., and then right at dark sort of cycle. And they were primarily doe. They were moving in and out of those oaks on a continual cycle. Well, with that, you're going to get a higher concentration, obviously, of scent, of doe scent, of deer poop. All that concentration is going to be there. And then what you end up seeing in these areas is these bucks will move into there during this time of the year, and they'll start asserting their dominance. Now, I suspect since this area in the past, I hadn't really seen a whole lot of scrapes opening up. This year in particular, there's a lot more scrapes opening up, which indicates to me that there's more competition in the area. So sure enough, when this group of doe came wrapping around the back side of the scrape and going in to enter those oaks, another buck came right along the transition. So if people ask about setup, how do you set up in proximity to this? The scrape is located relatively close to the transition between the hardwoods and the swamp itself. So it's not, there are other scrapes located in the middle of the island, but those aren't particularly interesting to me because the deer, a mature deer, has to travel quite a bit of distance to get to the center of the island. And I found behavioral wise that they like to run the edges. So, whether it be the south, the north, or east or west edges, and they like to run those transitions and scan because the bedding, if it's on the downwind side or if they get deer that are traveling in that same pattern. And in this case, you'll see the predominant paths on either side of that. So sure enough, he came cruising in. He was a nice, pretty mainframe 8, just at the ears, a little bit outside the ears, and he came right in and started banging his rack against that licking branch, and it's buckthorn, so it's rather stout. If you've ever dealt with buckthorn, it's a harder wood. It's kind of a nasty wood. But he started scenting his orbital glands on there and just banging his rack like you could audibly hear it across the whole island. And then he kind of caught my silhouette a little bit because I was sitting up, but not really that far from him. And luckily, that group of doe came in, and then he focused in on them. And it took a couple minutes, and he wasn't going to let those doe just meander into the oaks unpestered. And he busted out and ran into him like a bowling ball going into bowling pins and just scattered the whole herd all over the island. And so my point is, during this time of the year, so those bucks came through. No other mature animals came through that night. Now the following morning, and I know this because of camera data, and it's like sometimes the cameras are like they're obviously super beneficial for intel, but they can also take a little bit of the fun out of it, or they're kind of the kiss of death, right? Because you're constantly looking for what's next on them. But the next morning, during that moon phase, right? So they planned on the 20th to 21st that there was a morning moon phase. I had 2 mature bucks travel along the same corridors and were in those scrapes going north back to where I know that there's like primary bedding. So I feel like back to that buck that's in that picture, that was a scenario where that pattern played in. So in that particular hunt, I had been hunting a bedding area that was north of the location where I killed that buck. That particular evening sit that I hunted, I didn't see any deer. But as I was coming back through on my evening walk back, I had noticed that there was a scrape that had opened up on the north tip of another island. And the way that that island laid out is there was a scrape right on the edge of the transition as it dipped down into the swamp. And there's a corridor that pairs two bedding areas. So you basically got a bedding area, a little swamp, it's a bedding area, high ground thicket, a little bit of a swamp, and then another high ground, and then another bedding area. So I decided, at that point that I had to stop feeling sorry for myself and I had to get up really early the next morning. So another tactic that I like to do in these morning sits here is to get in really, really early. If you have to walk a fair amount of distance, like tomorrow I'm going to go out. I'll probably leave the house at like 2:30, 3, so I can get to where I have to start walking by 3:30, 4 o'clock. And then I'm all set up and settled down by like 5 a.m. Now it seems incredibly early, right? Because I'm basically sitting in darkness for 2 hours. But the window in which these bucks move a lot is just in that 15 minutes of gray light. It's just as the sun is starting to come up and you get that little window of gray light is when they're slipping, at least right now I feel in this pre-rut phase before things start getting crazy, that these mature animals are just slipping back late because they're out checking those scrapes in the evening. So they're not, really active during daylight hours, but they're doing it in these gray light morning hours. And that particular buck was doing exactly that. A doe, so the way that I explained those two bedding areas that connected, a doe actually came out of the southernmost bedding area and she started making her way to me in gray light and kind of wrapped around the back side of me. And she went and put her nose right in that scrape and then, scented it, took a piss in it, and started to walk off into that swamp transition. Well, right as she started to do that, I heard a very soft grunt from the south. And that particular 8-pointer started making his way towards me. Again, from a distance, I couldn't really tell the size of the buck because it was right at that gray light. But as he drew closer, I could clearly see, the cage and the rack. And I always try to set myself up in those positions where, obviously I interpret that the deer are coming, in this case, we're coming from a southern position. So I wanted to be facing that direction that they were coming from with bedding behind me, which is sort of opposite of what you would do in an evening sit, right? And I was also playing the wind in the opposite direction. So my wind was just off, but it was just off sort of blowing towards bedding, but I didn't care about that because I wasn't expecting, the buck to be there when I was setting up. I was trying to beat him back to his bed. And sure enough, he came in and he wrapped around me at 15 yards. And that one, I actually, the first hit I had was a little back and high. So I spined him and he was actually laying on the ground, sort of flopping around. He had his head up. And I remember I had waited, I was looking, he was laying about 40 yards from me on the edge of the island. And I think I had actually called Dan on the phone and was telling him how it played out. And he's like, you better get another arrow in that thing because I had a buck once jump up and run off,
Yeah.
So I quick got another arrow in and I turned and I drilled him right in the heart then, and then waited another 15 minutes and he was laying there dead. But so the point of that story is I think you got to connect during this time of the year. You want to connect, that bedding area that you believe them to be traveling to, whether you had intel from, scouting, or you actually saw, a mature deer on hoof that you're after in some other scenario, and that they're bedded in that area. And if you see fresh sign, that was a case where, I walked past that area in the evening the night before, and there was no fresh sign there, right? I could see that there was a, an area where there was an old scrape, but it wasn't actively being used. Now, as I advanced forward and north, I noticed that there was rubs going into um, that bedding area. But again, for the evening hunt, I didn't see anything. So, coming back out and seeing that that scrape was activated means that I was far enough north on my evening hunt that I wouldn't have disrupted anything. If that deer was out moving around, he could have easily came there that evening and activated that scrape and then went off about his business. Might have been bedding in another area. But so matching the active sign, it's like, okay, this thing was here. It's going to be coming back to this area. And so to make that estimation and knowing that there are two bedding areas were in that proximity. So that's why I set up in the middle of them to get that travel back. And I have a couple other scenarios this year and basically in this next week for morning hunts that I'm going to try to do the same thing, where I feel that there are mature deer, again, with some camera intel moving back in this same pattern. Different area, but they're using a similar pattern. And I would say that's another important thing too, is like, just because you're not hunting the same property and you're at other locations, try to recognize patterns. I'm a big one for like pattern recognition. You've probably heard, there's a lot of things in life that are about patterns, no matter what you do, your job, your personal life, whatever. Pattern recognition is big. And I think these scenarios and how these deer behave, recognizing those patterns and trying to repeat that in another location is been effective for me. So
No, it's a great story, and I feel like this is about the time of year where I really start to key in on mornings, but I feel like it's kind of a continuum. So right now, my experience has mirrored your own, where the morning movement is real limited. It's maybe that first half hour, that first 45 minutes, and it's always near a bedding area. I think that's actually, let's see if I can point the right. That's how I shot that buck. That was very early November, and I climbed up my tree in gray light, and 5 minutes later that buck came in that kind of scenario right next to a bedding area. So that's a great tip. And the setups too, you got to be in there early. Like you said, that was a walk in an hour before dark, set up your stand, climb in, and sometimes you wonder what you're doing when that stuff doesn't work out. But when it does, then it makes you feel real smart.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I've had, we tell the stories of the successful ones, but I've had dozens that have been long walks in the dark and sit and see nothing. But I feel like it's part of this whole thing of your craft. As the season goes along, the reason why we practice, the reason why we go out and I like getting hunts and sits in is because you really start honing in and focusing, and as you start understanding how the deer are potentially using an area through encounters or really through, when I go in and stage hunt an area, it's like through learning about, what you ultimately didn't see, right? Because you check that off your list. Okay, I didn't see or hear anything in this location tonight. Now, there's a lot of factors to why that might be, right? But you also got to break down your setup. Did you come in not quiet enough? Did you come in and the wind was a little squirrely and swirling on you? Could you have accessed it from another way? And these are things during this time of the year I'm really, really starting to hone in and think about, because once I've kind of located where I think a couple mature animals are, then I'm trying to think of every single scenario that gives me the best chance of going in there and killing them before it gets to a time where, you always got a chance during the rut, sitting in a funnel or sitting in a proximity location where, they could run by you, right? But I feel like it's more random. where now you still have a small window of that precise bed, bedding area could pay off for you.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's one of the big things that I've learned since joining the Beast is like every season taking notes on what you saw before. I mean, obviously there's a lot of great hunters on the Beast, getting their insights, putting that to work in your own area. And that's another thing. It's kind of like nothing is exactly the same area to area. So you got to integrate that into your own style. But that's how you end up becoming a consistent killer is to make, or to put all those things together in your area in a style that works for you. So a lot of great tips there. Mario, real quick. So we got about 350 people on and I wanted to
Yep.
wait a little bit before I did this, but I think you were going to do some sort of giveaway. So why don't you say what you're
Yeah.
going to
So
give?
what?
You're going to give
Yeah.
away,
So
and then I'll let people know how they can win.
what we're gonna do tonight is we're gonna give away a 4-pack of Beast Gear climbing sticks. So we'll do a random draw at the end of the podcast, and we'll announce it, and then we'll get your information. We'll figure out how. Somehow we'll get your shipping information. We'll ship it all to you, and so you'll have it just in time for your rutcation.
That's awesome. Super generous. Thanks, Mario. So if you're interested
Yeah.
in that, make a comment in the live chat so we know you're in here. You can put in sticks or beast gear, some sort of comment just to make sure your name is in the chat. And then when we wrap up, here's what we'll do. So this is going to be for the live viewers only. We want people to watch the show live each week. So if you're watching this after the fact and you didn't have a chance to win, join the live next week. And what we will do is as a channel moderator, I can pin a comment. So I will pin the winner at the top of the comments. And if you see your name, get a hold of Mario at Beast Gear, get a hold of myself. And then we'll get your shipping information and Mario will get those sticks out to you.
Yeah. Sweet. So, yeah, what else do you want to talk about? So other things during this time of the year, one other, I guess, recommendation is, and this year I added, 2 to 3 other properties to my scouting circle. I know you'd asked the question, like, how do you balance a busy work, business, and family schedule? And I think ultimately it's like anything else. You have to be very deliberate about your schedule, very deliberate about your time. I have kids that are older, one daughter that's in college and one daughter that is in high school. So, their activities and things that I'm involved in my family is very important to me. So I think this is a thing that all of us as hunters, with this passion, we struggle with, because, we have this, our ego and our personal desire and our passion goes in one direction, but like many of us, we have a strong alliance to our family and what they have going on. So I kind of set things up where I have enough time to be able to take off time from work, take off time from the business during specific times of the year. I spend a lot of time doing family activities, whether it's our vacations or if it's summer trips. My wife's a teacher, so it helps us do a lot of things in the summer because she has the time off, and focus on that during the months where all this craziness isn't going on, and then just try to reserve the time. Like, my day is pretty planned out and scheduled, so I like to get up early. I think a lot of people, if you want to get a lot of extra stuff done, get yourself to bed, at 9, 10 o'clock, and get up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and you can get a lot of extra stuff done. And I think there's a balance there. I'm big into physical fitness too, so I like to work out every day. And leading up into the season, I was a wrestler for many years, so I just kind of have it ingrained in me. I actually enjoy the suck of hard physical challenges. Now I'm getting older now, I'm 48 years old, so you have to train your body in a little bit different manner. And I've adjusted that over the years to work on more stability and flexibility things. I do a lot of circuit training where I'll set up different groups of exercises, whether it's I'll do sled pulls, pull-ups, a lot of strength to body weight stuff, sled pulls, pull-ups, push-ups. I do, traditional bench, but kettlebell workouts, a lot of dynamic like lunges and other workouts like that keep my flexibility and my range of motion. So focusing on my hips, my lower back, my shoulders. I find that as the season wears on, and I'm either if I'm out in hill country and I'm climbing an elevation, or if I'm trouncing through the swamp, there are factors of that physical fitness that translate into a calmness that's in your mind when you're having to go in and hunt these deer. I know if I have to go through a difficult piece of terrain to get somewhere to set up, that physically I can rely on my body to get there without being fatigued. If you're fatigued physically, a lot of times you get fatigued mentally, and then you don't make good decisions or mistakes happen. And so it's just part of my whole regime to keep that level of fitness because it gives you confidence and it keeps your mind sharp for the things that you're trying to do throughout the year. I also think nutrition is a big thing. Keep a good balance of nutrition, and then just communicate with everyone in your household. It's like the stuff we used to have this mantra when I was coaching wrestling for many years. It's called win what's important now. And I think, have a list in your life of prioritized of what is important now. What are you working on now? What things you need to take care of now so that future, short-term or mid-term goal, you can be ready to accomplish it and achieve it. And I think in this hunting game, what draws me to it is it's the challenge. It's really the woodsmanship. When I was a kid, I spent a lot of time because there wasn't the internet, there wasn't, social media and cell phones and all this stuff. So I spent a lot of time out in the woods, and my life, my job, and the other things that we end up getting involved in as adults as we evolve, it does take away from some of that time. So I think I try to disconnect when I get out there and really get back in touch with, okay, what is really going to make me successful when I have my boots on the ground? And that's slowing down, paying attention to what I'm seeing. And that's in the form of, do I see where deer are browsing on certain plants? Am I picking up the nuance of a track that's been laid down that wasn't there before when I came across this area? What has changed from the previous year? I mean, maybe I go to an area only one time a year. What's different? And what am I seeing at the moment that I'm walking in? A lot of times I'll have an area that I want to go to. It's a plan. I've looked at a map and I want to go right in there. I've planned out my access based on the wind and other factors that are at play. But I get in there and what I'm seeing changes everything up. It could be physical changes to the landscape. Trees could have fallen, buckthorn could have grown up, which actually can change the way deer use bedding or the way deer use traditional travel patterns that you might have seen in the past. So I think you got to recognize that and adjust to it.
I want to circle back to what you said about fitness and growing up in the Midwest. I think with whitetail hunting, especially, that's not always the first thing that comes to mind. But since moving out west, I think my success or the success of any hunter is directly proportional to your fitness level, because the animals out here are just so much farther out, spread farther out. Elk, you have a tough time finding elk within a mile of any road, and it's a lot tougher terrain. So if anybody's watching and has plans to do any Western hunting and they're worried about their fitness, I'd say the sooner you start, the better, because like this year, just as an example, I was getting on elk pretty regularly, but the area I was getting on elk was 3.5 miles from the nearest parking area. So I was exactly like you said, I was getting up 4:30, 5 o'clock, hiking 2 hours in the dark, and I was getting on elk consistently on the public land next to some private. And after an hour of daylight, they were all back on private land. So if you weren't doing that, if you didn't have the fitness level to do that, then in that particular area, you just weren't getting on the elk. So super important there. I don't think that gets talked about enough. And I'm 40, so I'm a little bit younger than you, but I'm getting into the second half, right? At 40 years old. And I think you touched on some great points there about, for me, when I was younger, I did like powerlifting and stuff. I don't do that anymore. I transitioned more into mobility and, like you said, circuit training, kettlebells, things that are going to keep you going as you age, and keep the age, or fight off the age as you age. So a lot of great points there. And I think people, if you're coming in your mid 30s, 40s, 50s, that's a ton of great advice there.
Yeah, and it just makes you feel good. You feel better. Your mind is sharper. You can involve your family. You know, your family will enjoy doing it too. And there's a lot of content and information out there. Rucking. You know, if you got a rucksack, you can get a weighted vest. That's, I didn't have, I didn't buy one of those right away. I just took an old backpack and I threw some dumbbells in it and I started roaming around the neighborhood with that. To get used to the weight on your back. Don't make that first time that you jump out into the woods with all your gear, kind of like the first time that you're feeling what that feels like to navigate over logs and through things. It's just part of that mental preparation for the whole experience. In addition to your scouting and finding beds and finding locations, I think it's part of it. It's part of it. Just like you're shooting, you know, it, and I always attune it to, if I was doing this every day to survive, how would I act and what would I think like? You know, um, again, I think the really successful people are breaking it down in their head like that. If I had to, you know, we're afforded the prosperity and our modern life here that, we don't have to hunt to survive. But when I was a kid, my family, it was a weekly, tradition. My dad was big into hunting waterfowl and small game. We hunted and we ate, what we killed. And I think, um, if you go into it with that mindset, that hunter-gatherer mindset, and think about, how would I treat this if it was what I was doing every single day to survive? You would have a different mindset about it. You would take it a different level of seriousness. Um, Now, again, you got to balance that. It's like, uh, I put family first. You know, my work and business stuff that obviously I have obligations to, comes next. And then when I can, it's like, then it's your passion and your pastimes. But um, don't be afraid as you get older. If you're someone that was young and all you had to do, is worry about yourself, I think as you get older and you start building a family, you start building a community of friends, you start getting more involved in other activities. Don't be afraid to have balance in those other activities, and don't be afraid to give in to kind of that selflessness where you're giving yourself and your time to other people. I think ultimately you'll still be able to be successful um, in your hunts and your pursuits. Um, Even with doing that. And I share that only because I know people who are really into this because I was there. I got an obsessive kind of personality that will be a demon that'll be in your head. It's like, how much do I balance between this? And this is definitely one of those things that if you pour everything into it, you can be successful. But I think as you have more people that rely on you in your life, you have to balance that.
No, sage advice there for sure. And I couldn't agree more with that.
Yeah.
So Mario, we're at the 40-minute mark. I'm going to give you a chance here if there's anything else you want to say to wrap this up, and then we'll get into some audience Q&A. So if you got a question for Mario, drop it in the chat and we'll field some questions here.
There's some funny comments. I got it open on the other screen, so I'm just
Okay. Yeah, people are pretty excited about the stick giveaway, understandably so. So that's a great prize, and at a prime time of year to be doing that. So Mario, are you doing any filming this year from the Buck Slayer?
Yeah, I am filming actually. That was another thing I was going to touch on. You know, we do have a camera arm in development where Dan and I are working on that. We got some designs of it, so we are planning on releasing that. And I've been playing around with, like, filming wise, I was using, you know, I do film with like a Canon G20, so a bigger HD camera. Lately, I've been playing around with filming with a cell phone. And actually, some of the newer cell phones have pretty good f-stop ratings. And you're not going to get an optical zoom that you get on, you know, a nicer HD camcorder. But I will say, the newer, you know, I'm an iPhone guy right now. I used to be an Android guy, but I have iPhones now because my whole family had iPhones. But the iPhone 12 and above, I have been filming with an old iPhone X, and that during like low light, gray light, it kind of, you know, it isn't the best. But the 12 and above, I found that it actually does pretty well in low light. So again, for the mobile hunters, you know, I've got one of our prototype camera arms, which is a much smaller profile camera arm, and I've been running a cell phone and doing a lot of filming with that, and it's been working quite well. So hopefully I'll get some time and get some video up there to share with you guys. So.
Well, that's exciting news, and I know self filming is more popular than ever, so sure people will be excited to see an offering from Beast Gear. On the camera arms, we got a question off of that. Rick Maga says, any new products in the works other than camera arms that you could talk about?
Our little saddle platforms are pretty popular, and so we're manufacturing more of those. We're also looking at some different stand modifications and styles. So that's something that we're doing some ideation around and some prototyping around. A true saddle platform is also something conceptually we're taking a look at. Again, that's really in, you know, there's a lot of that out in the marketplace right now, but we do sell a lot of sticks to saddle hunters. And I have close friends and hunting partners that they hunt exclusively out of saddles. So it's been having good dialogues with them, getting feedback on what they like, what they don't like. So I think you'll see us break into that space as well. And you know, really the multiple sizes of the stand is something that we've wanted to release, and we've been working on. So, and to give people a little bit of background, you know, we are a relatively small manufacturer. I mean, we manufacture everything here in the United States. So logistically, you know, some of the turn times and things that we have on this stuff, we take the time to test it, and so it does take us a little bit longer. But yeah, we have some stuff in the works. So.
Here's a super hunting related one. Master Chief Billy Sunday wants to know, how much do you bench?
How much do I bench now? Now,
Sure.
so
Let's go now and all time. Sure.
Yeah, we'll go now and all time. So my last rep workout, I did 205 for 3. So for an old man with a broken elbow, I'm pretty happy with that. I got away from doing traditional bench for a long time because I busted my elbow. I dislocated it wrestling. It actually came out and up, and so prior to that, the most I ever benched was 310. And then I got to the point where I was just doing a lot of push-ups and strength of body weight stuff, but it wasn't doing it for me. I wasn't really making gains. And so I started this summer, I implemented doing a more traditional powerlifting complex for my bench, and started slowly adding heavier weight back. I would like to possibly get back up to doing like 225, 230, but again, the mechanics of that, you know, it's just something that I want to continue to be physically strong. And it's the same with deadlift. I used to do powerlifting too, deadlift, squats, and all that stuff when I was in high school, and in through college because I wrestled through college. But your body responds a little bit differently. But I do a lot of sauna. I typically do these higher intensity circuit workouts, one day, and then I'll do a heavier strength training workout the next day. But I follow post workout. I like to sit in the sauna for 15 to 20 minutes, usually anywhere between 170. If I can get the sauna up to 180, that's great. But what you'll find, I don't have a cold plunge tank, but I do cold showers in the morning, which is the best I can do, which right now the house water is getting a little bit colder because it's getting a little bit colder outside. So that wakes you up in the morning a little bit more. And it actually has a pretty sustained response for energy throughout the morning when you do it. But the sauna, I think cardiovascularly, the sauna is really good for your heart health. And if you have your heart rate elevated post workout and you go right into a heated sauna, I bring a full Nalgene bottle of water in there and really just flush my entire system. And what I find with that, again, the benefit, I used to do it, when I trained competitively to compete in wrestling. There's cardiovascular benefits to that, but then your heart rate being elevated for long periods of time and the stress of wrestling in a tournament where you're wrestling multiple matches and so forth. As I transition it into like the world of hunting and just being outdoors, in the early season, I might be going out in a sit, first week of September, and it's 80 degrees. My body feels much more regulated if you are able to sit in a sauna and expose yourself to extreme heats and then extreme colds. When you get out in that 80 degrees, it doesn't suffocate you. I don't feel like I got a 100-pound weight on my chest. So, I that stuff's super beneficial. If I had a place in my house other than my garage, but I still might do it, I'm considering putting one in my garage. So I just have it here at my house, so I don't have to go to the gym to use it.
If I had to guess, Mario, I'd say you're a Huberman Lab podcast fan. Would that be accurate?
Oh yeah, I nerd out on all Huberman stuff. And
I like watching him too.
Yeah.
So Twigs Angling wondered, did you guys change the Batwing B-stand bracket? He said he saw something different in a recent post than what's on his stand. So has there been any different iterations?
If you have an original stand, you probably have a really slimmed down profile one that's got a little bit longer tines on it. The newer one is beefier through the center. The tine length it's a little bit narrower. The tine length on the end is relatively the same, but it's just a beefier bracket in general. So just shoot me an email on the info@honeybeastgear.com if you have one. If you want a newer one, I'll swap that one out for you.
Awesome. DB Tom, similar question. How do I purchase a beast seat to upgrade my original Lone Wolf? Do you sell just the seats?
We actually have a lot of seats in stock now. We don't have them posted on the site. So if you email me at info@honeybeastgear, I can get you hooked up with a seat. We have seats in stock right now, and we got the bull packs and everything for it. So.
And give that email one more time, a little slower, Mario, where they can reach you.
Oh yeah, it's just info@honeybeastgear.com. If you go to the website, it's like up in the upper left-hand corner too.
Perfect. So any tips for hunting the rain and the back end of the cold front coming in this weekend?
Yeah, the rain is interesting. My experience with rain. So tomorrow morning it's supposed to rain, right? I plan on setting up in the rain anyways. Now, I've had mixed experience on this, to be honest, but I do feel like the percentages are in your favor that the deer will get up and move in those windows when the rain stops. So even though it can be miserable sometimes sitting out in the rain for an extended period of time, and it doesn't always pay off, I feel like there's a strong enough percentage, because I've had experiences in the past where I've sat in the rain, and immediately following the break in the front, like every deer in the woods got up out of bedding and moved towards an area either to feed, or during this time of the year, it seems like the deer want to go to these community areas. And I know there's been a lot of talk, if you're in hill country, about thermal hubs and how those play into the scent pooling and how deer are uh, identifying who's in the area. But a lot of times they'll want to come in and freshen up these scrapes that are in these centralized locations. Again, like the scrape I described that I killed that buck on, and the scrape that I described that I saw the two, the 8-pointer and the 9-pointer on Friday night, that is a scrape that I would consider prime for sitting in proximity to, just following a rainstorm, because it's an area that's has 3 different land topographies around it, and it's in close proximity to bedding. So if a storm is coming in and deer are getting pelted and they're hiding out in their beds, they're hiding out under cover, when that storm breaks, then those deer are going to want to get up and be active and come in and scent that scrape. They're going to want to mark that scrape and reactivate it. So it can be a money situation. But I when I sat on, was it last night? The days are kind of blended together. There was a small storm front that moved through. It rained for like 30 minutes, and it was actually lightning. So I set up my stand. I got out to my location. The thunder cracked, and it started raining. And I sat at the base of the tree because it was lightning in the distance a little. And then the storm front broke, and I got up and sat. I didn't see anything where I was, but a friend of mine that was hunting a couple miles away, the area that he was hunting had ridges and hills, and he had deer moving all over that place once that rain stopped. So, mine was a swamp island location, which, but he was in the hills and they were actively moving after that rainstorm.
That's great advice, especially with the scrapes. I think this time of year, this is probably Exodus did a good thing about scrape week. The last 10 days, 7 days of October, it can be prime scrape hunting, and especially after a rain, like you said, when their bucks are looking to come in and reactivate it. So great tips there. Dave Anderson asked Mario, if you had 1 week to hunt from October 31st to November 7th on public land, how or what areas would your focus be on? Mornings, small parcels, water, woodlots, etc. What are you doing October 31st to November 7th?
Yeah, that's a big, broad question. It really depends on what intel I have leading up until that point. Let's just say I have a clean slate and I don't really have any intel on anything, right? Then my focus is, going to be on those areas where I feel there's a high concentration of, where I know there's a high concentration of doe bedding, and I have an inkling that there is, proximity to what I would call rut beds or, buck bedding that can monitor that doe bedding. I don't know that, it's not necessarily full on that right now, but I think the bucks are starting to monitor the doe. And hopefully that's why I always pay attention to, even if I go and sit in areas in the early season, and the only thing that comes out of a bedding area and multiple times is doe, doe, doe. Well, I still make note of those areas, and I also make note of the areas that have, relatively open bedding, but then are next to a transition area that's thick, that will hold does, but anything that's a large racked animal would have a difficult time entering that and actually running through it and giving chase. Because if you start factoring in the downwind sides of areas like that, of thickets, um, quite often you're going to get these bucks cruising those downwind sides of those areas that they can't actually, I mean, obviously we know if they wanted to, they could plow through it and access it, but often they run the outskirts of it, right? They navigate the outskirts of these areas, and it can be multiple areas like that across a piece of property. So if I'm out boots on the ground, I would, if I had the time off, I would get up early in the morning. If I had a place that I knew I could sit in the morning, I would sit in the morning. Depending on what I saw or didn't saw, I would pack up, and then I would start walking, and I would start looking for sign on the ground. Sign in the form of tracks, sign in the form of browse. Obviously, rubs and scrapes are obvious, but I more look for, you know, if I see trails going into any area, whether it's a trail that leads up into a hill country section, or if it's a trail that's going into a swamp bedding area, how well used is it? How wide is the trail? How much dirt is torn up in the swamp grass? So the areas that I have around here, I'm favoring the swamps right now. Now, that being said, there's some really good action you can get into out in hill country, or in northern Wisconsin when you get into more of the kettles and things like that, that act like sort of a mini hill country. Um, what I like to focus on in those areas, and this might sound a little, well, it's just going to sound like what it sounds like, I guess. But as a kid, I grew up, the farm country that I grew up around, it had high hills and peaks. And through years of observing how the deer like traveled those areas, there's just a certain way that they like to transition across the highs and the lows. And all the saddles and the cut points, the benches. You might see a transition between two peaks that make sort of a belly, right? And a change in elevation, but it's like a shortcut, right? The deer can walk up from the low and wrap around the backside of the other point without having to walk up a straight 60-degree elevation. Those little changes in topography, again, I find cruising bucks or bucks that are actively wanting to travel a great distance across that type of topography, those are the areas they're looking to move through. And in elevation, if you find those little bowls that are in those situations, those are creating a pool of scent. If you got thick in those little bowls, a lot of times you're going to find bedding in there, or you're going to find bucks that are going to want to bed in that low because they get the advantage of the scent pooling in there. Now they can be hard to kill, right? Because if you go try to set up on there, your scent could be drawing into it. But those two different topographies are the areas, I like to focus on. Typical funnel area situations, if I know one bedding connects another bedding, get myself in the middle of it, look for that primary trail. Typically, if you run like a topo map, you can see an elevation line. And I'm not talking like having to be in extreme elevation where you're moving up, from 100 to 1,000 feet. Even if you're just moving up, slight changes in elevation, there will be a predominant trail typically on that slight change in elevation, going from a lowland to a highland. And look for those connecting trails that connect to bedding areas and get yourself set up in there.
So, here's an interesting question. Mario, did you quit your day job yet?
No, I didn't. I do my day job and another job and like 4 other jobs. Actually, yeah, I still work my day job, as well as doing the beast. I've got a lot of good people that I work with on beast gear and help me out. Rick, you guys know Rick. He's on a lot of the videos. Rick helps out a lot at the warehouse and a lot of the logistical stuff and organization around there. So I've got a good core group of people that help out, that work with us now. But yeah, I still work my day job and my family job and my other side hustle. So that's why I said, learn to wake up early and but part of that's my personality. I mean, we've got, I grew up in my dad came over from Italy. I've said this on other podcasts and things, but my family grew up, in a blue collar household. My dad was a roofer. He was a barber. I worked a variety of jobs when I was a kid. So that work ethic has always just been instilled in me. And so, you want to achieve great things and do great stuff. You just got to put in the time and do the work,
There's not a lot of shortcuts in life. If you want it done, do the work.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all good. You get a story to tell at the end of it. Trust me. There's always a story to tell.
All right. I think that was all of the main questions that I caught in there. So turn it over to you, Mario, if you got anything to say in closing. We're right at an hour, so probably about time to wrap it up.
Yeah. I appreciate your guys' time, and I wish everyone the best of luck. For those that are getting out hunting this time, it's like, for the Midwest, this becomes the fun time for a lot of people. It's a bittersweet time for some of us that really like to focus on specific bedding areas because things can get all crazy, and then there's a little bit more luck of the draw. But this is a fun time of the year, and just get out and enjoy it. Part of what I was talking about before, where I had those 2 bucks and I passed them. It's always a good feeling, like, to just not put so much pressure on yourself to be successful or chase a certain thing. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Everyone's got different goals that they want to achieve and succeed on. But those are personal, man. Enjoy the experience. And I'm just as excited to see what my friends get and what the people that I connect with on a regular basis that I'm hunting with, what they end up seeing and getting as well. So I'm ready to soak that whole experience in. I got the bat phone sitting on the side of my desk in case one of my buddies shoots one, that I'm like the first guy that wants to be there to help drag.
You're going to take advantage of all that physical fitness you've been working on.
Yeah, I got to use it for something, right?
That's
Can't just sit and watch TV.
Well, Mario, I appreciate your time. I want to reiterate that we're going to do a random drawing of anyone that commented after, and we will pin the winner to the top of the comments on this video. If you are the winner, get a hold of Mario at info@huntingbeastgear.com, correct? Info@huntingbeastgear.com.
Yeah. Just go to huntingbeastgear.com to the website. We'll have that email there as well. But we will locate you. So
that's right. We'll be like Liam Neeson. We'll find you.
We'll find you.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the time, Mario. There's a lot of comments in the chat that it's good to see you, and I know you're a busy man, so I appreciate your time, and we'll try to get you back on here sooner than later.
All right. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
All right. Have a good night, everyone. Thanks. Bye.